The red was so small I almost mistook it for a reflection. Almost. At 10:47 on a Thursday night, the Halstead Hotel ballroom looked exactly the way expensive rooms were designed to look, untouchable. Crystal chandeliers burned gold above 200 guests. A jazz trio played near the windows. Champagne moved through the room in silver trays, and every laugh seemed polished enough to belong in an advertisement. I had been carrying one of those trays for 6 hours. My name is Maya Bennett. I was 27, 3 years into working private events at the Halstead, and good enough at my job to disappear when wealthy people wanted privacy. That night, disappearing turned out to be impossible. I was collecting half-empty glasses near the dance floor when someone stepped backward into my path. I shifted the tray automatically, balancing 12 champagne flutes with one hand. The silver surface caught the ballroom lights. Gold. White. A flash of red. I stopped. At first, I thought it came from the emergency exit sign. Then the red point moved across the polished tray. Slowly. Deliberately. My eyes followed its reflection. Across the room stood Adrian Vale. I knew his name because everyone who worked that evening had been told at once and warned not to say it unnecessarily. He wasn't the loudest man in the ballroom. He didn't need to be. People made space around him without seeming to realize they were doing it. Conversations softened when he passed. Men twice my age waited for him to finish speaking before they answered. Adrian wore a dark suit with no tie, one hand resting loosely beside a glass of untouched bourbon. He looked calm. The red dot rested in the center of his forehead. My fingers tightened beneath the tray. For 1 second, my brain offered every useless possibility. Call security. Shout. Duck. Run. Then I noticed the men positioned along the walls. Adrian's security. If I shouted, every one of them would turn toward him. So would Adrian. Whatever was aiming at him would know it had been seen. I lowered the tray onto an empty table. My heart started pounding hard enough to blur the music. 20 feet. That was all that separated us. 20 feet of silk dresses, black tuxedos, perfume, candlelight, and people who had no idea something was wrong. I started walking. One of Adrian's men noticed me immediately. His body shifted. Not much. Just enough. I kept going. Adrian looked up. His eyes found mine before I reached him. Dark. Still. Measuring. I had served powerful men before. CEOs. Senators. Athletes who expected the room to bend around them. This was different. Adrian Vale didn't demand attention. He made attention feel like a survival instinct. I stopped in front of him. Close enough to smell cedar and something faintly smoky beneath his cologne. Close enough to see the red still sitting against his skin. His gaze dropped briefly to my empty hands. Then back to my face. Can I help you? His voice was quiet. Controlled. Behind him, one of his men took a step toward me. I didn't look away. If I hesitated, I knew I would lose my nerve. So I smiled. The same professional smile I used when guests complained about wine temperatures or table assignments. Then I held out my hand. Dance with me. For the first time, Adrian Vale looked surprised. Only slightly. But I saw it. His eyes narrowed. What? I kept smiling because half the ballroom could see us. My hand stayed between us. Please. He didn't take it. The red dot shifted less than an inch. My breath caught. I leaned closer, like I was sharing something flirtatious enough to justify my stupidity. Instead, I whispered 4 words. There's a red dot on your forehead. His expression didn't change. That scared me more than panic would have. For half a second, Adrian Vale simply looked at me, as if deciding whether I was lying, confused, or worth believing. Then his eyes flicked once toward the nearest window. Not enough to turn his head. Not enough to warn whoever was watching. He placed his glass on the table beside him. "Dance," he said. His hand closed around mine. Warm. Steady. Mine was neither. The jazz trio slipped into a slower rhythm as Adrian guided me onto the floor with the kind of ease that made the movement look planned. Around us, no one reacted. A few guests glanced over, curious about why a waitress had suddenly been invited into the center of the room, but curiosity was safer than alarm. I could live with curious. I wasn't sure I could live with being right. "Where is it?" Adrian asked. His voice barely reached me. "Still there." "On me?" "Yes." He moved one step. I followed. The red point slid across his temple. Again, I whispered. We turned. The dot shifted toward his hairline. Adrian's hand tightened slightly at my waist, not possessive, not rough. Precise. Like he was measuring distance through touch. "How far do I need to move?" "I don't know." "That's not useful. I'm a waitress, not a sniper." Something almost changed in his eyes. Not amusement. Recognition, maybe. "Then tell me what you do know." I swallowed and forced myself to look past his shoulder without making it obvious. The ballroom windows reflected everything: chandeliers, candlelight, people moving in fragments. Somewhere beyond the glass, Chicago glittered 40 floors below us. The red dot moved again. 3 steps left. Adrian didn't ask why. He trusted me. That realization hit harder than it should have. 1, 2, 3. He turned me with him. The sound came a heartbeat later. Sharp. Not loud enough to be cinematic. Not the explosion my body expected. Just a violent crack of glass behind us. Someone screamed. The music stopped. A champagne flute slipped from a woman's hand and shattered on the floor. For one frozen second, nobody understood what had happened. Adrian did. He moved before anyone else. His body shifted between mine and the windows as his security team surged inward from every wall. "Down," someone shouted. Guests dropped behind tables. Chairs scraped. A man near the entrance reached inside his jacket. Adrian raised one hand. "Close the room." That was all. No yelling. No visible fear. But the effect was immediate. Doors shut. Security spread through the ballroom in coordinated silence. 2 men moved toward the windows. Another took position near the service corridor. I realized Adrian was still holding my hand. Then he let go. Not because the danger had passed. Because he had noticed. That mattered more than I expected. "You hit?" he asked. I stared at him. "What? Are you hurt?" "No," he glanced over me once, quick and clinical, then looked toward the broken pane. Only after confirming I was standing did he check himself. The red dot was gone. My knees suddenly felt weak. Adrenaline had been kind enough to keep me upright while I needed it. Now it was leaving. I gripped the back of a chair. Adrian noticed that too. One of his men approached. "We have a likely position across the street." Adrian's gaze stayed on me. "Likely?" "Rooftop southeast corner." I looked toward the broken glass. Something felt wrong. Not danger wrong. Geometry wrong. The shot had come from one direction. But the reflection I'd seen on my tray hadn't. I lifted my eyes to Adrian. "I don't think they're looking in the right place." Adrian turned toward me. Not quickly. That was what made everyone else stop. His security team had been moving with clipped efficiency, radios whispering, shoes crossing marble, men pointing toward the southeast windows. But when Adrian looked at me, the motion around him seemed to hesitate. "Why?" he asked. I pointed toward the broken glass. "The shot came from there." One of his men nodded. "Exactly. But the dot didn't." Silence. I could hear the air conditioning again. The faint buzz of the chandeliers. Someone crying quietly behind a banquet table. Adrian studied my face. "Explain." I looked down at the empty silver tray I had abandoned earlier. It was still on the table where I had left it, catching pieces of light from the ceiling. "I didn't see the dot on you first. I saw it reflected there." His eyes moved to the tray. So that tray was angled toward the west side of the ballroom. The security man frowned. "A laser can scatter." "Not like that." He looked at me as if I had become inconvenient. I knew that look. I had seen versions of it from hotel managers, vendors, guests who assumed a black uniform meant my brain had clocked out with my dignity. Normally, I let it go. Tonight, somebody had tried to put a hole through a window behind Adrian's head. I was less interested in being polite. "I carry those trays 6 nights a week," I said. "I know what they reflect." The man opened his mouth. Adrian raised one finger. He closed it again. That tiny gesture unsettled me more than shouting would have. Adrian stepped closer to the tray. "What was behind you?" I turned slowly, reconstructing the room as it had been minutes earlier. Dance floor. Bar. South wall. Decorative mirrors between the columns. Then I saw it. One of the tall bronze-framed mirrors near the service entrance sat at a slightly different angle from the others. Barely noticeable. Maybe 3 degrees. Maybe less. But I noticed because I had helped set this ballroom that afternoon. "That one." Adrian followed my gaze. "What about it?" "It was straight at 4 o'clock. A security man crossed the room and examined the frame. No damage." I didn't say it was damaged. I walked toward it before fear could remind me that I probably shouldn't. Adrian came with me. Not ahead. Beside. That surprised me. I stopped a few feet from the mirror. There were fingerprints along the brass edge, but in a hotel that meant nothing. Staff touched everything. Guests touched things they were specifically asked not to touch. Still, the angle bothered me. I pointed toward the wall. "The cleaning team aligns these with the seam in the paneling. That's how we keep them even." The frame was off the seam. Just enough. Adrian looked from the mirror to the windows, then to the silver tray behind us. His expression changed. Not fear. Calculation. "If the beam hit this first," he said quietly, "you would have seen the reflection from another direction." "Yes." One of his men shook his head. "The shot still came from southeast." "I know." Adrian turned to him. "And that's the problem." The man went still. I felt the meaning before I understood it. The laser in the shot might not have been doing the same job. The realization sent a cold ripple down my arms. Adrian looked at the mirror again. Someone wanted my attention somewhere else. I stared at him. "Or wanted your security looking somewhere else." His eyes returned to mine. This time, there was no surprise in them. Something more dangerous had replaced it. Respect. "Who had access to this room before tonight?" he asked. I glanced toward the service corridor. "Almost everyone who works here." A beat passed. "Then," I added, "and a few people who didn't." Adrian's eyes sharpened. "What people?" I glanced toward the service corridor, where hotel staff stood clustered behind one of his security men. Black uniforms. White shirts. Nervous faces under fluorescent light. Contractors. Floral delivery. Audio crew. Temporary bartenders. I swallowed. Half the people who touch a ballroom before an event don't work for the hotel. One of Adrian's men was already moving. Lock down the staff areas. Nobody leaves. The words landed hard. A young server near the corridor went pale. Someone farther back whispered something I couldn't hear. Then another security man stepped in front of the employee exit. That was when my fear changed shape. Until that moment, danger had been outside the glass. Now I saw what panic could do inside a locked room. They didn't do anything, I said. Nobody answered me. The first security man spoke into his radio. Separate hotel employees from outside vendors. Phones on the table. We'll question them individually. A busser I recognized raised both hands. My phone's in my locker. Then get it. His voice wasn't loud, but the kid flinched anyway. I stepped forward. No, the security man looked at me. So did everyone else. For one strange second, I became painfully aware of how ridiculous I must have looked. 27 years old. Black service dress. Sensible shoes. A name tag still pinned crookedly over my chest. Standing between frightened hotel workers and men who moved through the room like every order had already been approved. The security man's jaw tightened. Ma'am, step aside. No, Maya. Adrian said my name for the first time. Quietly. I looked at him. He stood several feet away, hands empty, expression unreadable. That should have made this easier. It didn't. You want to know who was in this room earlier? I asked. Yes. Then you need people to talk. They will. Not if they think one wrong answer gets them treated like suspects. One of his men exhaled through his nose. This is a security matter. And they're hotel employees, not your soldiers. The ballroom seemed to shrink around us. I could feel every pair of eyes. My heartbeat thudded against my ribs, but I kept going. I'll tell you everything I remember. Who came through? What changed? What didn't belong? I looked toward the staff gathered by the corridor. But nobody gets punished because they're scared. The security man started to speak. Adrian lifted 2 fingers. He stopped. Instantly. No argument. No hesitation. Adrian kept his gaze on me. You're giving me conditions. I'm giving you the best chance of getting honest answers. A pause. Long enough for me to wonder if I had finally pushed too far. Then Adrian turned slightly. Phones stay with them. His men listened. No one is touched. No threats. No intimidation. The security man's expression shifted. Adrian, you heard her. That was it. The pressure in the room changed. Not disappeared. Changed. The staff noticed too. Shoulders lowered. Someone breathed out. Adrian looked toward the service corridor. Ask questions. Don't create answers. His men moved away from the doors. I stared at him. I hadn't expected agreement. Not that quickly. Maybe not at all. He caught me watching. What? Nothing. That wasn't nothing. I looked toward the employees again. You could have ignored me. Yes. But you didn't. No, there was something unsettling about how little he needed to explain himself. Then one of the hotel workers lifted a trembling hand. I saw someone move that mirror. Every face in the corridor turned. Adrian's eyes found mine. The investigation had finally started. And this time, people were willing to talk. The hand belonged to a banquet captain named Luis. I knew him well enough to know he hated being noticed. That made the fact that he was speaking now matter. Adrian turned toward him. When? Luis swallowed. Around 6. The 4 guests came in. Who? A contractor. Or I thought he was. One of Adrian's men stepped closer, but stopped before crowding him. Luis looked at me first. Then at Adrian. He had a hotel badge. Gray polo. Tool case. Said he was checking fixtures. What did he touch? The mirror. Luis pointed toward the bronze frame. And later he asked us not to use the East Service Hall. My stomach tightened. Why? He said there was a fire. Inspection. I looked at Luis. There wasn't. His face went pale. I know that now. Adrian was already moving toward the nearest floor plan mounted beside the ballroom office. I followed him. The paper was meant for staff evacuation drills, color-coded and painfully ordinary. Red arrows. Exit routes. Stairwells. Adrian stared at it for 3 seconds. Then his finger touched the east corridor. What happens when there's a threat in this room? One of his security men answered immediately. We move you off the floor and toward the secured elevator. Using? The man went quiet. The east corridor. A cold sensation crawled up my back. The broken window suddenly felt less important. Adrian traced the route with one finger. Ballroom. Service door. East hall. Private elevator. Every movement predictable. Every turn already chosen. They didn't need the first shot to land, I said. Nobody responded. Adrian looked at me. I kept my voice low. They just needed everyone to react. His eyes shifted back to the map. To protocol. The word sat there between us. Clean. Professional. Terrifying. One of his men reached for his radio. I'll send a team down the East Hall. Adrian stopped him. No, the man frowned. We need to clear it. We need to stop doing what they expect. Silence again. That was the second time that night I watched Adrian change a decision without making it look like uncertainty. He wasn't stubborn about control. He was precise about it. There was a difference. He turned to Luis. Did the contractor say anything else? Luis rubbed his palms against his pants. Just that nobody should enter after 8. He said the fire marshal would fine the hotel if we interfered. Did you see where he went? Service elevator. Adrian nodded once. Thank you. Luis blinked. Maybe he had expected something harsher. So had I. Adrian's men moved to check surveillance and access logs. For the first time since the glass broke, the ballroom became quieter instead of louder. I stood beside the evacuation map, staring at the red arrows. You knew they'd move you that way, I said. My team did. That means someone else did too. Yes. His answer came too easily. I looked at him. You're not surprised. I'm rarely surprised by people wanting something from me. That's a lonely way to live. The sentence escaped before I could stop it. Adrian's gaze settled on me. For a moment, neither of us moved. Then he said, "You're still here." I glanced toward the staff corridor. "I'm helping." "You could leave." "Could I?" Something changed in his face. Very slight. He looked toward the 2 men still standing near the employee exit. Then back at me. "They'll move." A second later, they did. No explanation. No argument. The doorway opened. Adrian stepped aside. Not in front of me. Not behind me. Aside. "You can go, Maya." I looked at the open corridor. Then at the map. Then at him. And for reasons I couldn't fully explain yet, I stayed. Because somewhere between the mirror and the broken glass, this had stopped being only about who wanted Adrian Vale dead. Now I wanted to know how they knew exactly what he would do. Adrian watched me for a long moment. You stayed for an answer. I stayed because someone planned around you. That happens. No, I shook my head. Someone planned around your habits. That landed differently. His eyes shifted toward the evacuation map again. The ballroom had emptied enough that I could finally hear the building itself, the low hum of ventilation, distant elevator cables, the faint rattle of glass being collected near the windows. Outside, Chicago kept glowing as if nothing had happened. One of Adrian's men approached. We're pulling surveillance from the service floors. Badge logs too. Good. The man hesitated. There's another issue. Adrian waited. No impatience. No demand. That silence did the work for him. The East Corridor wasn't just marked for evacuation, the man said. Your advance team approved it this morning as the primary extraction route. My stomach tightened. Adrian's face remained still. Who knew? Everyone assigned tonight. Hotel security had the final route for coordination. So not everyone. No, the distinction mattered. I could feel it. This wasn't somebody guessing how a powerful man might leave a room under threat. Somebody knew. The man stepped away again, already speaking. Into his radio. I looked at Adrian. You don't seem surprised. I'm thinking. You think very quietly. People make mistakes when they fill silence. I almost smiled. Almost. Then the adrenaline inside me shifted again, leaving behind something colder and heavier. My hands had started trembling. I folded them together. Adrian noticed. Of course he did. There's water behind you, he said. I'm fine. That wasn't a diagnosis. I turned. A bottle sat unopened on a service table. I twisted the cap, took a drink, and realized how dry my mouth had become. When I faced him again, he was still standing exactly where I had left him. Not closer. For some reason, that registered. Most men who thought they were helping moved in. Touched an elbow. Put a hand on a shoulder. Decided proximity was reassurance. Adrian gave me space. You do this often? I asked. Get shot at? Have entire rooms reorganize themselves because you're in them. His expression changed slightly. You noticed. Everyone notices. They pretend not to. That's not the same thing. No, the answer was quieter than the others. I studied him. The man standing in front of me controlled the temperature of a room with 2 fingers, yet he seemed almost more careful with power when nobody was forcing him to be. That unsettled my assumptions. I wasn't sure I liked that. You told your men to move away from the door, I said. You wanted to leave. I didn't. You wanted the choice. There it was. Simple. No speech about respect. No attempt to make the moment bigger than it was. He had understood anyway. I looked down at the water bottle. My mother used to say a locked door feels different when someone else has the key. Adrian said nothing. I regretted the sentence immediately. It was too personal for a man I had met less than an hour ago. But when I looked up, there was no curiosity in his face. No attempt to pry. He only said, you have the key here. Something in my chest tightened. Not attraction exactly. Recognition. The dangerous kind. A radio crackled across the room. One of Adrian's men looked up from a tablet. We found the contractor. Adrian turned. Where? Service elevator footage. 6:17 p.m. The tablet was carried toward us. On the screen, a man in a gray polo stepped into the elevator alone. Tool case in one hand. Hotel badge clipped at his waist. Before the doors closed, he looked directly into the camera. Then lifted his hand and covered the lens. The screen went black beneath the contractor's palm. 3 seconds later, the camera came back. The elevator was empty. Adrian leaned closer to the tablet. Run it back. His man did. Gray polo. Tool case. Fake badge. The brief glance into the camera. Then darkness. Again. This time I watched the floor indicator above the elevator doors. 16. 17. 18. The image disappeared. When it returned, the elevator was descending from 21. He got off upstairs, I said. Adrian's man nodded. East service level. The same corridor. No one spoke for a moment. Then another piece of footage appeared. Different camera. Grainier. The East Hall at 7:52 p.m. A figure in the same gray shirt crossed the frame carrying the tool case. He disappeared around a corner near the private elevator. At 7:56, he returned without it. My stomach tightened. What was in the case? We're checking. Adrian's expression had gone colder. Not angrier. Colder. One of his men approached from the ballroom entrance holding a clear evidence bag. We found this behind a service panel near the east stairwell. Inside was a laminated access card and a small metal insignia. Adrian stared at it. Everyone around him seemed to understand before I did. What is it? I asked. No one answered immediately. Then Adrian said, a signature. Whose? A crew I'm not supposed to be fighting. The words were careful. I looked at the insignia again. So whoever left that wanted you to think they were responsible. Yes. One of his men spoke. It fits. Their people know our routes. They've pushed before. Adrian turned his head. Too clean. The man stopped. Adrian took the evidence bag, studied it, then handed it back. You don't leave your name behind unless you want it found. That should have reassured me. Instead, it made the room feel smaller. Because now the shape of the plan was becoming clear. The shot. The mirror. The blocked corridor. The planted insignia. They hadn't just predicted where Adrian would move. They had predicted what he would believe afterward. One of his men lowered his voice. If it is them, we can't wait until morning. Adrian looked at him. Nothing moved in his face. But something in the air changed. I felt it before I understood why. This was the part they had planned for. Not the ballroom. Not the laser. This. The moment after. The moment when every person around Adrian would expect him to become exactly what fear said he was. His man continued. We hit back first, we control the message. Adrian's eyes stayed on the evidence bag. I looked at the broken window. A janitor had taped plastic across part of the frame, and cold night air slipped through the edges. A small shard of glass still rested on a nearby table, catching the ballroom lights. I picked it up carefully. There was a faint red reflection across its surface from an exit sign. For 1 second, I saw the dot again. Then I understood. I set the glass on the table in front of Adrian. He looked down at it. They knew where you'd stand, I said. His eyes lifted to mine. I didn't tell him what to do. I wasn't his conscience. I wasn't his strategist. And I had no idea what kind of history sat behind the silence gathering around us. But I knew what I had watched all night. A plan built around reflexes. His security teams. The hotels. His. Maybe they know what you'll do next, too. Nobody breathed. Adrian stared at the glass for a long time. Then his gaze shifted toward the man waiting for his order. I stepped away. This decision wasn't mine. That was the point. At the service corridor, I looked back once. Adrian still hadn't spoken. But the man who had demanded immediate retaliation was no longer reaching for his phone. Adrian finally spoke after I reached the corridor. "Go home, Maya." I turned. His men were still waiting around him. The broken glass caught the chandelier light between their shoes. "What are you going to do?" His eyes held mine. Something they didn't plan for. That was all he gave me. And strangely, it was enough. I left the Halsted at 1:18 in the morning with my coat pulled tight against the Chicago wind. No black SUV followed me. No security man insisted on walking me home. Adrian had offered protection once. I had asked for choice. He remembered. The next day passed in fragments. 3 hours of sleep. Coffee I forgot to drink. My phone vibrating every few minutes with coworkers asking what I knew. I knew almost nothing. That was the worst part. By evening, rumors had started moving through the hotel faster than room service. 2 organizations. An old agreement. Something about retaliation before midnight. Nobody knew what was true. I kept seeing Adrian standing over that piece of glass, surrounded by men waiting for permission to become dangerous. At 9:40 p.m., I was back at the Halsted. Not because anyone asked me to be. Because rent didn't care about assassination attempts, and apparently neither did the banquet schedule. The ballroom remained closed, so I was helping reset a smaller dining room downstairs when the lobby changed. That was the only way I can describe it. Conversation softened. A bellman straightened. The night manager stopped mid-sentence. Adrian had entered the building. He was alone. Almost. 2 men remained far enough behind him to feel less like an escort and more like a shadow. He saw me near the service station. But he didn't come over. Not immediately. He crossed to a private room at the back of the restaurant, where 6 men were already waiting around a long walnut table. I recognized none of them. I recognized the silence. The door closed. 20 minutes passed. Then 40. No raised voices reached us. No one rushed out. That somehow made me more nervous. At 53 minutes, the door opened. 1 man walked out first, pale and angry. Another followed without looking at anyone. Then another. Nobody was smiling. Nobody looked afraid either. They looked confused. Adrian came out last. He adjusted one cuff. That was it. No triumph. No rage. Just control. He stopped beside an empty chair visible through the open doorway. One of his men approached him. "It's done?" Adrian looked at the men leaving through the lobby. "There will be no war." The words were quiet enough that I almost missed them. His man. "Didn't. You sure?" Adrian turned. The question disappeared from the man's face. I said no war. Something moved through me then. Not relief exactly. Something heavier. Because I understood what the decision had cost. Not money. Not territory. Expectation. Everyone in that room had come prepared for Adrian Vale to behave like the version of him they already believed in. He had refused to give them that man. Adrian finally looked toward me. I didn't smile. Neither did he. He walked over and stopped on the other side of the service station. "So," I said, "they were wrong." "About what?" "What you'd do next." His gaze stayed on mine. "Were they?" I thought about it. About the locked ballroom. The open doorway. The way he had stepped aside instead of deciding for me. "No," I said quietly. Maybe they were right about who you were yesterday. Something flickered in his expression. Pain, maybe. Or memory. Then it was gone. And today? I looked past him at the empty private room. At least today, you chose. For once, Adrian Vale had no answer. And somehow, his silence said more than anything else could. He held my gaze for another second, then looked toward the private dining room. Choice is expensive, he said. So is letting other people make it for you. A faint breath left him. Not quite a laugh. Then one of his men approached and stopped a respectful distance away. They're waiting downstairs. Adrian nodded. Whatever had happened in that room was finished, but the consequences clearly weren't. He looked at me once more. Go home before your manager finds another reason to keep you here until sunrise. I glanced at the banquet cart beside me. You sound like someone who's never had to close a ballroom. I've had other closing duties. The line was dry enough that I almost smiled. Almost. Then he walked away. No demand that I call him. No warning that I belonged anywhere near his world. No promise. That mattered. Over the next 3 weeks, the Halstead returned to normal in the way hotels always do. Broken things were replaced. Security reports disappeared into offices. Guests complained about valet times. The ballroom windows were repaired so perfectly that most people would never know one pane had been shattered. I knew. Every shift, my eyes found the spot. At first, I checked reflections constantly. Silver trays. Mirrors. Windows. Anything that caught light. Then, slowly, I stopped. Adrian didn't come back. I heard his name twice from managers who lowered their voices when they said it. Once from Luis, who told me the hotel had quietly changed every contractor access procedure after that night. Nothing more. Part of me was relieved. Another part hated that I noticed his absence. On the 22nd night, the ballroom hosted a museum fundraiser. Same chandeliers. Same polished floor. Same jazz trio near the windows. I was carrying sparkling water toward table 14 when the room shifted. Not dramatically. Just enough. A conversation paused. A host straightened his jacket. 2 men near the entrance stepped aside. I knew before I looked. Adrian stood beneath the doorway. Dark suit. No visible entourage. No urgency. He scanned the ballroom once. Then found me. My pulse changed. Annoyingly. I set the tray down before I could drop something expensive. He crossed the room slowly. People moved without being asked. That part of him hadn't changed. What surprised me was what happened when he reached me. Nothing. He stopped. He didn't invade the space between us. Didn't reach for my hand. Didn't decide. I glanced at his forehead. No red dot. I checked. This time, I did smile. A small one. So what are you doing here? The band slipped into a slower song. Adrian looked toward the dance floor, then back at me. For the first time since I had met him, he seemed almost uncertain. Not afraid. Careful. May I have this dance? The question hit somewhere deeper than it should have. 3 weeks earlier, I had held out my hand because there was no time to ask permission. Now there was nothing but time. You're asking, I said. Yes. Not ordering. No, I let the silence sit between us. He didn't fill it. Didn't persuade me. Didn't move closer. He simply waited. That was when I understood what had really changed. Not the city. Not his reputation. Not even the danger surrounding him. His relationship with power. He had learned that restraint wasn't weakness. That choice mattered most when you had the ability to take it away. I placed my hand in his. This time, I said, you follow my lead. Something warm moved through his eyes. Fair enough. He stepped onto the dance floor with me. No one in the room knew why the moment mattered. They only saw Adrian Vale dancing with a waitress. But I knew better. The first night, I had pulled him away from the place everyone expected him to stand. This time, he stepped away on his own.